Okay. And I want to thank Sunset Technologies and Michelle, she's been wonderful, and Dr. Aman Kaur, who is our leader of Women in DSO. Your panel here, we're all members of Women in DSO, and if you don't know about us or have not joined, I encourage you to. And it's not just for women, it's for anybody who supports women in dentistry. So. Thank you all for being on the panel, and thank you, Bill, for introducing everybody. I did want to just mention really quick, Rondi, she's being a trooper with us today. She's dealing with a bout of vertigo, so just...
If I look like I'm holding on for dear life,
That's exactly.
feel like I'm falling out of this chair.
But thank you for joining us. So the role of technology in scaling a DSO, this is a great topic. It's one that's near and dear to my heart. I'll just tell you really quick, my relationship with technology in dentistry I started in private practice nearly 30 years ago, and Rondi, I think you can relate to that because she has a similar background. And I worked for a dentist who was what we call an early adopter. I don't know if you know any of those types, but that means he'd go to conferences in CE, and then he'd come back all hyped up. And then sometime throughout that first week back, the boxes would start appearing. There'd be like a box with a cart and one with a monitor, and we'd be like, Doc, what's going on? And he's like, it's gonna change our lives. Our patients are gonna have better care. You guys are gonna have more time. It's gonna be awesome, whatever it was. So the staff and I quickly learned that what we had to do was unpack the boxes ourselves, read through the German-only instructions, and figure out how to use this stuff, because if we didn't, what was gonna happen to it? It was gonna sit in a closet and never get used. So we had to learn how to implement new technology every time something like this happened. It was great for us because we had wonderful technology in our office, but we were very motivated to implement it because our practice administrator and CPA was also the doctor's wife. So before the bills came in, she needed to see that we were using the technology. So that's kind of my origin story with technology and DSO. So with you guys, and Rondi, I'll go ahead and start with you. In your history of scaling DSOs, what have you seen as successes, and then what have been some challenges or maybe not so successful implementations?
So I would say the technology piece really encompasses clinical subset. It encompasses the administrative teams and then the support functions behind the scenes. So there's really a lot that gets integrated when you're scaling a DSO. And a lot of times what we think is going to improve everyone's lives might not really be realistic. So an area that I think we've been really successful is working with like clinical leadership groups or non-clinical leadership groups within our company and rolling out tech on a smaller scale to make sure it's adapted, to make sure that our field likes the product, get their feedback. And before we go live, there really needs to be communication across the company and not just via email. I mean, that's a world a lot of us live in, but not our dental practices. To make sure that they understand why we're implementing this new technology, how it's going to benefit them, how it'll simplify patient experience or their day-to-day life. Because the challenge, and I think probably everyone can agree, is the buy-in, right? When you roll something out, everyone is change adverse. And for our model, we started out as a de novo model and then changed into doing affiliation. So that has its own sensitivities, and needing to lead our organization with perspective and being empathetic to the field and understanding it's not that we can't implement change, but it's when's the right time. Like if we're gonna roll something out company-wide that's gonna affect day-to-day operations, and we send a couple emails and it goes live in November, that's gonna fail. I mean, that's the busiest time of year, most demand on the practices. So it's really being cognizant of what we think sounds really great and what's gonna be adapted in the field.
Yeah, and I love that you talk about getting buy-in from the field and understanding from the field level what's in it for me and also what's in it for my patient, because I think that creates a lot of motivation. So Lorri, you've worked in operations, COO of Riccobini, but also consulting in operations with other DSOs. So what successes and challenges have you seen in implementing technology as a DSO scales?
Yeah, I think, and I'll speak from Riccobini experience mostly, but the key to either the success or the failure is all about the communication, both before and during. And we do a lot of acquisitions. Riccobini grew from 10 practices to over 50 practices in less than a few years, and so that's a lot of acquisitions, very few of those were de novos. And so the conversations that happen before the deal closes to level set expectations about technology changes are super important, because when the owner, doctor, or the team doesn't come in understanding that it's not just the practice management software that may have to change, it's also accounting, and it's also payroll, and it's also, the credit card statements. It's everything that changes or potentially changes depending on kind of what your model is. And if the expectation isn't set up front that that's probably going to happen, I think then that sets it up for failure. So, and then I think the second piece of that is that when the deal closes and the teams are getting on board with the change, it's the training and just having that hands-on, heavy-handed approach with being on site, doing the hand holding with the training of the new technology, of all of those technologies. Again, I think we get so focused on practice management software that we forget about all these other technologies that directly affect all the employees on a daily basis. And those are the ones like payroll. Everybody cares mostly about how do I clock in? How do I make sure I'm going to get paid? Those types of things. And those are super important not to forget. So I think just, again, like Rondi said, like thinking about it from the user experience and making sure that the communication is really great and that the training is really great can make or break an acquisition process and integration process.
Absolutely agree. Over communicating and then having a really great training program in place, I think, are key. So Dr. Kaur, you've been a C-level executive at DSOs for the past 10 years. What can you share with us in terms of successes and challenges you've had with scaling DSOs and how technology plays a role?
Technology is backbone of scaling a DSO, because that's when you start eliminating people and start implementing processes. Mm-hmm. And most of these processes come from technology. The key to success is communication. It can be in any ways, but to make communication better, it needs to be tracked communication, and that's where systems come into play. Anytime you look at a DSO and you want to acquire it, or a group practice, you think about it, are they poised to grow? And if they're not poised to grow, do I have a platform where I could just plug them in? So that's how the consolidation happened. That's how value gets created. And when it comes to communication and training, what happens is mostly 2-3 people keep talking about it. They're working with the salespeople. They think, we got it, we understand it, let's roll it. But end users are not part of those communications. And then there's a flip side of it. Sometimes you end up picking a small group of end users, and they're not good representation of where you are planning to go. So picking that group who you want to incorporate in that communication is also very important. And then thinking about their users. So why front desk employees get upset? It's not that they are not understanding system. Now they have to retrain their patients too. So thinking about the ones they have to interact, a lot of those things. So systems that come, it's a very big web of systems and technologies. Non-system related, even just cash accounting to taking them to accrual-based accounting, it makes people very, very uncomfortable. And one thing I tell everyone, never mess up with anyone's paycheck. And that's the biggest worry.
That is very good advice.
Never. So go overboard and make sure that is a priority. And when you're consolidating practices, people get worried, how do I clock in? Do my benefits change? Do I get paid on same day? What happens? So a lot of those things, these need to be over-communicated, over-prepared. And then EMRs, everyone thinks it's very important to get people on same EMR, but it's changing the guts of an office. When you put an EMR, you change the guts of that organization pretty much. So be careful about it, tread lightly, because there are other ways to do it too, because you can have AI plugged in on the back ends, and you can still go slowly about it. But that's where having teams bought into come into play. But what matters to create a value is everything is tracked and everything is your business. I don't want to call them KPIs, but the things that move the business, they don't become invisible.
Very good. And then Rashmi, from your perspective, working with so many DSOs at Launch Loyalty in Carrington, what are some examples that you could give of successful technology rollouts as as your groups have scaled DSOs, and then what are maybe some pitfalls or roadblocks that you've seen?
So being in the industry now, going on 24 years, from a Carrington perspective with our dental network, as well as Launch Loyalty with our membership plans, I bring a slightly outside vendor perspective, yet being intimately familiar with how dental offices work. So from our standpoint, some scaling issues or challenges are across the board technology related, like determining what technology fits best for your office or offices. So technology is a solution to a problem, and that's the perspective we need to look at, and not necessarily buy into the next latest, greatest shiny object. So first it needs to solve for what the objective is that the office is trying to achieve. Is it automation? Is it a better RCM? Is it? So many examples here with all the vendors present and us in explaining the various different aspects of technology and the different problems they solve. So determining that, and then finding the right partner. It's like a marriage. You find the right partner that grows with you, aligns their philosophies with how your practice operates, and that creates for a successful long-term technology partnership. And I think that's critical in ensuring that any kind of technological conversion or buy-in is successful. And then the other aspect that all of my esteemed colleagues here have stated is buy-in or adoptability. I think that is key. And that starts with the partner as well as internal buy-in from top down, ensuring that everybody is aligned with the objective of bringing a particular piece of technology in, whether it's a membership plan, explaining how it works, providing the right training, ensuring that support is always there in implementing these technologies. So if, your front office staff, that's really people on the field, don't feel isolated and left to their own devices and trying to figure it out.
And I can't agree more with you. I come from the vendor perspective as well, and I've been doing it for over 20 years. And I agree with you that it has to be a partnership. If you go into it as a DSO saying, okay, I'm the customer and you're the vendor, and that's the relationship, it's not going to be as successful as if you're really partnering together. And then the other piece of that is that you have to take that technology into your DSO and make it your own, brand it as your own, make it part of your culture so that when you roll it out to your team, it's not just, hey, salesperson, go train my office. It's this is how we use it within our organization, and really having ownership in that.
Right, and 23 years, there's no two DSOs that are the same. There's no two carriers that are the same. So you have to really step in and understand what they want, what the client wants, what fits the bill for them. And so I can't just pull something out of a hat and say, here, implement. I think so it's critical to be in lockstep.
Absolutely. So let's shift gears a little bit. Dr. Kaur, in addition to all of the other hats that you wear, you take a very active role in private equity and working with those groups. So can you, give the group here kind of your thoughts on what are some low-hanging fruit technologies that DSOs can implement that will increase EBITDA and make them more attractive to investors?
That would increase EBITDA.
That is the key, that will increase EBITDA.
Yes. So that would increase EBITDA is, of course, you want to track your patients and increase revenue and revenue cycle management. But very, very low-hanging fruits, consolidation also has a value, even if initially it may cost something. So being on one payroll system is really important. Having one benefit system is really important. And even having one EMR program is important. It really helps. If you can't have one EMR, don't have 7, at least have 2. That is very important. But whatever, that's an area I just like to explore a little bit further. The APIs in the back, you have to put some kind of BI behind it. So you are tracking everything, your scorecards match for offices regardless of different EMR programs. So that is the key. And EMR programs, you have to be very intelligent about how you choose them. They have to be very open based on what kind of financial institution you can plug them in for credit card processing or even subprime financing options. There are so many of them. Because I continue to say this, patients are becoming consumers. They want ease to spend money. They want that text to pay. They want to get a lot of that information beforehand. So whatever system you're choosing, make sure there is a patient portal. It wasn't a thing available in the past, but that is key. Patients want to feel in driver's seat, so that's how you're private equity groups look at them. And even this kiosk model, offices have computers. It just takes just an extra layer of diligence to have your practice's kiosk model, because you can, all those HIPAA and every violation, you can protect it.
Right.
But it's a real behavior modification to get there. And then for accounting, you have to have a good system. QuickBooks alone is not enough. There are very good accounting softwares that one should have. And I think HR, EMRs, and these are low-hanging fruits. And in terms of patient communication, that is also important, because people want to see larger groups. When you're putting in a lot of money, you want to see how many patients you have, how many active patients you have, what is the average lifespan of these patients. And some standardizing measures for clinical quality are very essential. So that would be some kind of project management software.
That's very good. And then Rondi, so let me shift to you, because you're kind of involved in the same space, but on mergers and affiliations. So with what Dr. Kaur is talking about in regards to private equity and how they look at practices, are you looking at the same things as you're looking at possibly affiliating, or what's important to you?
So I don't have a checklist that I go down and say, okay, extra dollars here because you have this system or you don't have this system. So that's important to note. But it does directly does affect and influence EBITDA in a practice, right? So 2 examples of recent affiliations we've done. One group in Pennsylvania still had functioning dark rooms with fixer and developer.
Oh, wow.
And the team there was like, could not wait for us to bring in digital radiographs and change the practice management software. They were looking for change. And when you look at the P&L, you can see that burdened, right? Staff is leaving. If I'm the assistant or I am the hygienist, I don't want to work there. I want to work where I have the tools that I need to do my job effectively and deliver patient care. Another practice in Indiana was techie. I mean, 4 E4D printers, 4 3D printers. They have, the team working on cases, and it's one of those things where you also know going into it that team does well with change, because every time new products are coming out, they're adapting it, and their valuation is going to be higher because their lab expense is at under 1%. So I'm not directly taking the technology as an influence in the deal, but it does affect profitability. And I think in today's market, it affects team members wanting to stay retained in a practice. Like, I want to be working in the practice that has the milling unit, in the waiting room for patients to see, and they know, we're like a convenient ease office, and I can do crowns in a day, and I get to use a little bit of my geeky clinical side day to day, right? So
Right.
Those kinds of things do affect the valuation.
And then also, as you're bringing new practices on, and you just shared that you've got practices sort of all across the spectrum, but are there some kind of standardizations that you do in terms of bringing on certain systems, like Dr. Kaur was talking about with payroll or things like that? When you bring a practice on, what technologies do you go after other than the fixer and developer? I mean, obviously that was important, but just generally, what's your process there?
So it's a little bit of a learning curve in the beginning, right? We have to understand their process and understand what they're doing and where we can make improvements, and listen to what the team is looking for and what they want to implement. And also sometimes we see things that they're doing that we're not implementing, and you're like, okay, how do we look at this a little bit more granular and see we implement this across the team? But automatically, patients should all check in and check out the same way. Appointments, they should be getting the same ease of scheduling, being able to have a chat function, being able to schedule online. But the clinical autonomy does need to stay at the practice level for an affiliation. That you coming in and changing their units of time for a cleaning or for a procedure is not something that we're dictating today. But we can help bring some of the redundancies to a more standardized process.
It's very good. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit. We've been talking about best practices, what's worked, what we've done in the past. But what I'd like to know now is, dentistry has a little bit of a reputation for lagging behind other industries when it comes to technology. And Lorri, I'd like to put this question to you first. what are you seeing? And especially because you came from, to give you guys a little bit of background, Lorri started as a social worker and then went into operations in skilled nursing. So that's how she started with operations, and so then she's gone from that to dentistry. So it's particularly why I wanted to know your input on this. What are you seeing in other industries, or what did you see in medicine that you think either is going to come to dentistry next or that dentistry needs to adopt?
Thanks for asking that question. Actually, my background is very circuitous, but prior to coming to Riccobeni, I worked for 3 years at a technology consulting firm and in the healthcare practice, and specifically worked on value-based care issues and medical dental integration issues, and working with different DSOs and payers and providers on a lot of different issues in that realm. And so I think that what you mentioned about dentistry kind of lagging healthcare, I think, first of all, I think it's a little bit of a myth, because I think people think that healthcare is a lot more advanced than it really is. But I do think there is something to be said for that. I think that interoperability and the ability for us to have systems and practice management systems that are able to speak to each other is something that is, from a regulatory perspective, coming to us, even though it hasn't hit dentistry yet, but it is coming. And a big problem that we have in dentistry that seems very granular, but it's a huge issue for this issue around healthcare, dental and medical integration, is the fact that in dentistry, we do not require dentists to put diagnostic codes on their claims. So in healthcare, you have to have a diagnostic code that goes with a treatment code. In dentistry, you just have to submit a treatment code. And that's a huge problem from a technology perspective when you start talking about interoperability and all these regulations around being able to share medical records for patient access. So, if you imagine a world 5 years from now where all of us have all of our medical records on our phones, dentistry is at a disadvantage in being able to comply with that, because we don't have this technology ability to talk to other records. So it's a big problem, and lots of brains much bigger than mine are trying to work on it. But it's this behavior modification, right? Because as dentists, why are we going to make our dentists go to this extra step of putting diagnostic codes on their claims when they don't have to? The payers aren't requiring them to. Regulatory-wise, we're not required to. It's a huge behavior management issue, but the technology's not going to work until that one thing gets added, that one field gets added. So that's just one thing in this realm, but I think that's a key point.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, Rondi, kind of the same question to you, and it doesn't have to be medicine, but just things that you interact with every day, industries that you see. I recently had an experience where I had to replace my windshield, and the app for the company for replacing the windshield, it was amazing. It was totally outstanding. Everything that I could do, schedule it right there. Dentistry's almost there, but not quite. So, what are some other things that you're seeing in other industries that you think are going to come to dentistry in the future that you'd like to see?
Well, I'm a dental geek. So there's 3 things that I have my eye on that we were kind of just throwing around before, but virtual reality and augmented reality is here, and I think it's going to impact our industry, and I think it's going to be pretty cool to see. We have a couple things we're piloting across some of our focus groups. And the other thing that is newer but has caught my eye is regeneration. And it sounds creepy, but I think it's cool at the same time. Like when you talk about growing teeth in petri dishes and being able to regenerate gum tissue, I mean, that's the future.
Yeah, absolutely. That is cool stuff. I'm with you. I'm a dental geek too. So Rashmi, what about you? What are you seeing? And I mean, being the CIO of Carrington, and you touch medical as well, but just also in the tech space, what are you seeing technology-wise in other industries that you think is either coming to dentistry or that we should look at adopting?
So I feel like when you compare all of the health fields out there, dentistry is one that is huge when it comes to technology. You look at all different realms of technology from the clinical side, the front office side, the post-patient care and CRM side, all the various different pieces of software and technology that interacts to make that patient experience end-to-end. So from my standpoint, I feel like some of the exciting up-and-coming, of course, coming from launch loyalty, subscription plans are huge. Like you were giving the example of your windshield. I got an email from my car the other day. Yeah, and it said that I could actually have my GPS on a subscription plan versus just having GPS. I was like, interesting. So things are changing, and when you look at what it's trying to solve for is attracting the right customer to your office, having them stay in your plan, and also then solving for some of the problems around having uninsured or underinsured patients. And so I feel we were talking a very exciting discussion last night at our table, talking about integrating health systems with dental systems and how that will take shape down the road and where the industry is right now. So when I think of advances in technology, like Rondi thinks of growing teeth in petri dishes, I think of data, and that excites me. I think of the massive amounts of information that exists in systems across an individual doctor's offices with DSO systems, and we look at the power of that data, and if it were to be combined on the health side of things, the mental side of things, and to look at a whole big cohesive picture, I think that's going to be invaluable. And you combine that with some business intelligence that Dr. Kaur was referring to, you combine that with AI, and there's some pretty cool things headed that way.
No, that's wonderful. And Dr. Kaur, I have a similar question for you, but I'm going to change it up a little bit. So what technologies do you see as being necessary or being attractive for, as DSOs are consolidating, dentistry is consolidating at an unprecedented rate, scaling and growing at astronomical levels, what is going to help people get to where they need to go in terms of future technology?
It's going to come down to standardization of care. I think that's the biggest advantage and flaw of this industry. Dentistry is the most subjective branch of medicine. You can pull a tooth, fill a tooth, put an implant, do whatever, and you're fine by always. And like what Rashmi just mentioned, there is so much data available. We should be able to standardize. Yes, AI is a cherry on top of this cake, but AI is, it's not more intelligence, it's just more standardized intelligence based on the data and algorithms they have behind it. But based on the data we have, we should know how many fillings turn into root canals, how many root canals turn into extractions if done at certain level, all those things. So that data needs to happen. One of the biggest failure in dentistry about technology has been teledentistry. It was such a cool invention, but it has kind of fell flat, if you think about it. But teledentistry can be really leveraged to standardize, actually, because especially with future technologies coming, you can have these X-rays and all those things. Because right now you can do bite wing extraorally. So imagine a lot of those things, post-op care, the initial meet and greet being done on teledentistry. That didn't get incorporated properly. And I feel like that can save chair time. If there were a lot of those post-op care, a lot of those things were done, and then different doctor can do meet and greet, and then there is another appointment where treatment plans get diagnosed, and that's where we can change this subjective opinion or subjective diagnosis to very standardized. It will lead to better documentation, it will lead to better data, it will lead to better follow-up. That's how I feel about it. Because what Lorri just mentioned, not having diagnostic codes, even if systems started putting those in, dentists don't know which diagnostic code needs to go for the treatment code. So there's a big education that needs to happen.
Very good. Lorri, I saw you nodding your head a lot. Did you want to add something to what Dr. Kaur had to say about this?
I just really agree about teledentistry. I mean, it was something that during COVID we all immediately stood up teledentistry across healthcare, not just dentistry. But for dentistry, it really has dropped off again, and I think there are so many use cases in hygiene, in orthodontics, in multiple specialties, post-op care, like Dr. Kaur said, just saving chair time. There's so many opportunities.
Very good. We are a couple of minutes ahead of schedule. Did any of you want to have any final thoughts about just technology and scaling DSOs, something I didn't ask? No, I don't want to put anybody on the spot. But yeah, I was going to go to that next. But Yeah, we can. Questions from the audience?
Any surprise that I would have questions? Questions. Do you know what the average reimbursement for insurance for teledentistry was by any chance during the COVID period? About $15.
Yeah, it was negligible is what the word I was going to use.
So my question to you is, when you guys are thinking about scaling and technologies, given that insurance has not changed in dentistry for the last 70 years and is lagging behind in keeping up with what doctors can do for patients, do you guys think about insurance at all, or do you guys say, oh, pooh, I'm not going to think about that, I'm going to focus on technologies and all the beautiful things that we can do to make? Because I think that insurances are really an obstacle in how offices are allowed to grow. And I was just wondering if you guys agree with that, disagree with that, if you have any comments about that.
I think we have a really good panelist here because Rashmi would, because to answer your question, we talked so much about revenue cycle management. It's and how tedious and all those things it is. And what is it, what do we have to put all these systems in places to get a patient who shows up at your office with a $1,000 coupon, right? That's it. And $1,000, I mean, can all of us sitting in this room afford things? Yes. But today we trip and we break number 8, need a root canal, build up, crown, or implant. Who's going to pay for it? You are going to pay for it. So that's my personal opinion about insurances. So, and when you're looking at it, but it's a marketing technique. That's how you get patients, because they go to their insurances and other things. But when they call you, what you do with them in order to make sure they get this great care, they are not kind of put in a bucket because of your insurance, you can do this. That's where one has to get creative. And as an office, as a group, as a DSO, you want to see my 50% of patients might be coming from insurance, but 80% of my revenue is coming from cash patients. So how do you make that shift? And I think Rashmi would be a great person to talk about it.
So I still have to go back to my day job at Carrington, where we deal with a lot of PPO networks. So I'll try to keep my launch loyalty hat on here. So it feels like all the points made are valid, and they're really made from a provider's dentist perspective. And there's a genuine issue with the actual revenue coming in from claims being processed and the speed of claims being processed. And so the issue is multiple fold. You look at the patient care side of things, and the mentality that having that card in your hand and having that $1,000 coupon is such a security blanket. So a lot of it is just adjusting the way healthcare and dentistry operates from that standpoint. But I genuinely feel like there's a playing space and a place for everybody. And there's a need that is satisfied and met with everybody. So subscription plans, for example, will help customers and doctors have their own discounts at their own terms on what they're willing to do, whether they're willing to offer a free cleaning or not. Does the x-ray is complimentary with your first visit or not? The dentist drives, the DSOs drive all of that. And then so ultimately they control the dollars being put in their pocket. And I think over time, as the paradigm shifts, they will have more buying power, which is what the insurance companies have leveraged for the longest time, is the fact that chair time is also critically important. And so you always have this fine balance of the number of cash patients filling your chair time versus the number of insured patients. And the first question somebody, when they call, asks is, do you take such and such? So answering that and dealing with it from there on, and then having a place for everybody in that playing space, I think is going to be critical going forward.
Totally agree with that. I just thought that the teledentistry was an awesome example about why something might be falling flat, even though technologically speaking. Like, why do you think teledentistry fell flat?
So Carrington, one of our companies, Dial Care, implemented we have various telehealth services: telehealth, telemental health, televeterinary health. Talk about, trying to get Milo to make a call. But then you also have teledentistry that we actually launched specifically for one of the large carriers in the nation. They wanted to have that option. And it wasn't offered as the only option available, so you call in and that's all you get. It was a value add layered on top of your existing, because during COVID, people were not being able to get to the offices as effectively. So they wanted to facilitate that care transactions, have their patients and members have the option to call their dentist, but the dentist not having the means to answer that call in a teledentistry-like fashion and pay sort of a fee for that consult. So there's various different flavors if you dug into the teledentistry space, but it started off with more a convenience and an alternative to actually being in the office, especially when we were all shut down for a good part of the year in 2020.
But I do want to say why, let's just say if we were to do the postmortem of this failure, why it fell flat, is we were not bought into it. It was new, and when it was the only option, we used it. We just think of it as an option. We don't think it as a better option. We don't think it as this would be a convenient thing for patient. A lot of us sitting in dental offices, we think of it as inferior way of care by not letting them come into the office, because we're just trained one way. So there needs to be more education. There needs to be bringing that virtual reality features, putting AI on it. So there's a better adoption, better education. Confidence always comes from knowledge. So we don't have enough knowledge, and we haven't taken the time to educate ourselves to believe in it and get confidence in it. But I think we need to do that. And any teledentistry company, they need to do this. They just can't just say better platform, you can do this, all this, but they need to talk about why is it good for patients, why is it good for the practices, how is it going to standardize it, and how long-term gain and short-term gain. They need to talk about
that's
it.
a very good point, but at least dentistry does not have the inherent roadblock or obstacle that telehealth had, where the physician lobbyist resisted it for the longest time. So you bring up a very good point, as an adoption starts at the doctor level.
Yeah.
And Dr. Kaur, do you think also building out use cases for it, like you had mentioned, you said hygiene and you can use it in different ways. Do you think that teledentistry providers, and we have teledentistry, do you think that we've kind of fallen flat with just not building out the use cases and really demonstrating all the different ways that you could use teledentistry?
Yeah, one of the biggest thing they should use is they should put this in all the emergency rooms. All the emergencies in medical hospitals, 7 out of 10, they come from dental emergencies at nights over the weekends. And what do those medical doctors do for them? Nothing. So imagine at that time, they had a platform and doctors they could call into. That could have been great, and it's a great way to gain patients who are in need of treatment. So there are just kind of so many things they could do.
Yeah, very good. We have about 5 minutes. Were there any other questions?
Yeah, there's one.
Over here.
Oh, I couldn't see.
Sorry, the podium's blocking. Hi.
Hi.
So thank you first and foremost, ladies. It's been a pleasure to hear your perspectives. And I just wanted to ask Rondi, just in terms of talking about communication, you talked about implementation, and one of the points that you made is it's not just email. So I was just hoping that maybe you could shed some light on what are some of the other communication vehicles that you use to really mobilize and help get people on board when implementing new technology.
So yesterday I was literally sitting in a focus group at our headquarters going through this with our internal teams of how we're going to improve communication, because when I joined the organization in 2020, we were about 60 practices, everybody. Now where we sit today, we're about 115 and growing. So you kind of lose that sense of everyone's close to home, and we now stretch from Maine to Michigan. And we can't expect the teams to read an email. That's antiquated. That's how we function internally to chat with each other. But if I'm going back to being practice level, I'll read your email on Tuesday next week when I get a chance. So we really need to be cognizant and really keep that perspective as to what's going on day to day in the offices and go to them. So we need to make sure that the technology we're rolling out, leverage the vendor, leverage help for bandwidth to make sure implementation is going right, and that the field understands not just the day it's going live, but leading up to town hall events. Put in a buddy system, so the focus groups, if it's a clinical product, that those doctors cheerlead, hey, we were part of this process. This wasn't a procurement decision. This isn't somebody sitting up, as a lot of people feel behind the scenes, oh, they're just making decisions, they don't care about us. right? So when you're doing your internal engagement surveys as an organization, you have to act on them and take that out as part of your go to the market, go to where your teams are, bring your operational departments or whoever can make that trip to make sure that there is presence and that the people who are engaged in those surveys, or maybe aren't, maybe they're your detractors, they'll show up at that event. And if they know, they can stand up and say, well, this is great, but we've put in tickets for sensors for 3 months and you guys never got them. You're damn sure someone's gonna write down that that office needs sensors, and you know your department's accountable now because everybody was there for it, right? So it's being accessible and being visual for everybody else who wants to have a voice. And so the bigger piece too is we have this perception sometimes where it's like, oh, well, that person, they're always gonna have something to say about every topic, but maybe they're just the only person that's getting the voice out there, and people have things to say and they just don't feel that there's a platform, that there's gonna be a change. So personally, I think buddy systems work really well. I think we implemented a learning management system. That's awesome too, because you're gonna have new hires and it's not realistic to go back out and retrain everybody in the field again a second time. So, those are avenues to improve communication and I think engagement across the company.
I want to add to that communication. I think when we think of communication, we think top down, make sure you know. Second part of communication is listening. We just don't think about how are we going to hear from them. So that feedback mechanism. And a lot of times, intranet, everybody who is like 15 offices and above must have an intranet. And don't have a dashboard just for KPIs, dashboard for relevant upcoming things. Should be based on job you log in under your credentials, what matters to you, what's coming, what's changing in your world should be there. So I can't put enough emphasis on that buddy system and real-time conversations.
And Lorri, you had a comment too?
Yeah, I was just going to add, one of the things that we talk about a lot is our talking points. And so for any sort of initiative or even any comment, the CEO makes in a town hall meeting, okay, how are we going to disseminate this information to make sure everybody hears it the same way? Here's the 3 bullet points about that topic that everybody's going to say the same way. So that, people put their own spin on it, but basically we're sending the same message, because I learned a long time ago in my career that I can say something and then I might have 5 regionals that will say it all a completely different way. So really being very deliberate about how it's communicated out.
So, and you didn't ask me, but I just want to provide the vendor partner perspective. Literally as basic as when we go in to do training, give me a point of contact for each office with a cell phone number. Let me know who's supposed to be in training and let them know they're supposed to be in training. I can't tell you how many times I've walked in like, we're having training today? Nobody told me that. Or, oh, well, you need to talk to Sally and she's not even here today. So just communicating with us and giving us the information, because we will take it and we will run with it and we'll make sure that everybody has training. And also, having your vendors, partner with your vendors to have some kind of sign-off system with your staff so that you can go back and see who was trained and who still needs to be trained and now who knows how to use the system. So that's just my little plug as a vendor partner. Okay, I think that's about our time, unless there's any final comments. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you ladies for being on the panel. Oh, we did? I'm sorry. Oh, and, sorry, and it is Rondi's birthday today.
Get up here. I want to put this in. Now, is Tom going to help us sing? Let's go. Let's do it.
Sing happy birthday to Rondi.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday